I wasn't expecting this, I mean, those guys had huge records, each one of those bands. I mean, I've been rewarded, so it was really especially sweet and a little bit bittersweet.
At 75, Bonnie Raitt has nothing left to prove. She's earned every standing ovation, every Grammy, every ounce of respect carved from decades of pushing through a male-dominated industry. But behind the grace and the guitar, there were names she never spoke. Until now, 6 musicians, 6 stories of betrayal, dismissal, and quiet fury. This isn't about drama. It's about the truth she carried in silence. Why did Bonnie keep quiet for so long? And what finally made her break that silence? The answers begin with the first name on her list and the scars behind it. The Clapton disappointment. When Bonnie Raitt was young and still finding her way through the tangled world of blues, she saw Eric Clapton as more than a musician. He was a symbol. The way he bent notes, the way he let emotion bleed from every solo, it was everything she admired about the genre. She didn't want to become Clapton. She just wanted to stand on the same stage without being ignored. They were both rising, though Clapton had already become a legend by the time she arrived. She never asked for his approval, but like any young artist, she noticed when it wasn't given. She noticed the way he spoke to others, and then turned cold when it was her voice in the room. She noticed how, during a press interview, he talked about the blues, as if it belonged only to men who had suffered in a certain way. The implication sat heavy, as if a woman couldn't hurt deeply enough to earn her place in the music. At first, Bonnie gave him the benefit of the doubt. She chalked it up to ego, to nerves, to the tension of being 2 strong forces in the same room. But over time, it became something else. Clapton didn't just dismiss her presence. He weaponized his influence to make her feel small. There were festival lineups where she was suddenly moved to a shorter set. There were shared gigs where he talked over her in interviews, even when asked about her contributions. He once told a radio host she was too polite to sing real blues, a comment so loaded and careless that it replayed in her mind for years. That wasn't just criticism. That was erasure. That was someone saying you can't hurt enough to matter because your pain isn't loud, angry, or masculine. Still, Bonnie showed up. She kept bringing her voice, her guitar, and her strength. She never fired back in the media. She never threw his name under the bus. That wasn't her style. She believed the music spoke louder than any feud. But when the energy became impossible to ignore, she simply stopped appearing on the same bills. She stopped walking into the same rooms. It was never about fear. It was about self-preservation. To this day, she has not spoken to him in over 2 decades. Not once. Not even in passing. And if her silence has seemed polite, it isn't because she has nothing to say. It's because she chose dignity over noise. What hurts the most isn't just the way Clapton treated her. It's the way others allowed it. No one stepped in. No one called it out. In a room full of musicians, silence echoed the loudest. And that silence followed her long after the applause had faded. In the years that passed, Bonnie continued to earn her place the only way she knew how, by playing her truth. She did it without gossip, without dragging anyone through the mud. But that doesn't mean she forgot, because respect, once broken, can rarely be repaired. And some names, no matter how revered, carry memories that never quite stop bleeding. Now, decades later, she's finally telling the truth behind the tension. Not to reopen wounds, but to acknowledge they were real. Because staying quiet never meant it didn't happen. Bonnie doesn't need revenge, she needs reckoning. And Clapton's name is just the first. The next name on her list didn't hurt because of legend or legacy. It hurt because it came from someone she wanted to help, someone younger, someone who could have carried the torch. But instead, he tried to snuff out the flame she offered. What happens when the student turns the stage into a battleground? What happens when mentorship is met with arrogance? That's where the next story begins. When arrogance burned the bridge. When John Mayer began to dip into blues, Bonnie Raitt was one of the first to notice. She had seen many young guitarists try to touch the soul of the genre, but few had the technical finesse and emotional curiosity Mayer showed in his early years. She listened to his phrasing, his choice of notes, the way he bent into each measure like he meant it. It wasn't just impressive, it was promising. So she did what veterans do when they see potential. She extended a hand. She offered conversation, guidance, the kind of behind-the-scenes honesty that no class or concert can ever teach. It wasn't formal mentorship. It was one artist believing in another and hoping that belief might shape something stronger. At first, Mayer responded with enthusiasm. He praised Bonnie in interviews, named her among his influences, and accepted an invitation to share a stage during a major blues festival. It was meant to be a symbolic passing of spirit, a celebration of tradition meeting evolution. But what unfolded on stage left Bonnie stunned. From the moment Mayer stepped out under the lights, something shifted. He dominated the space, stretching solos beyond their rhythm, pushing verses off tempo, playing louder and longer than the arrangement called for. He moved around the stage like it belonged to him and him alone. Bonnie tried to catch his eye, to signal a return to balance, to remind him that this wasn't a solo act, but he never looked back. When the song finally ended, Mayer didn't wait for applause to settle. He walked off stage without acknowledgement. No thank you, no handshake, not even a nod. The crowd had cheered the cohesion of what they thought was a planned moment of chaos. Bonnie stood in the middle of that applause, feeling like a prop in someone else's performance. The next day, she read a quote in Rolling Stone that sealed her silence. Mayer had said the set felt long, like it dragged, like it lacked energy. No mention of her, no sense of shared experience, just subtle dismissal, cloaked in cool detachment. Bonnie didn't explode. She didn't call him out publicly. She didn't need to. She simply never invited him again. Not to a song, not to a show, not even to a conversation. Because what Mayer failed to understand wasn't just etiquette, it was grace. Bonnie has always believed in the unspoken dance between musicians, the give and take, the way a shared chord progression can say more than a monologue. She believed that the best music happened in the space between egos. But with Mayer, there was no space. There was only performance. And yet, it wasn't just the moment that stayed with her. It was the disappointment. She had hoped to support a future pillar of blues, someone who might blend modern charisma with deep reverence. But what she saw instead was an artist obsessed with spotlight, too proud to listen, too sharp to share, and too caught up in his own image to see the gift he had been offered. That moment wasn't just a professional letdown, it was personal. Because Bonnie didn't offer guidance lightly. She offered it when she believed someone could carry it forward with care. And when that trust was broken, it didn't just close a door. It changed her view of what kind of voices the industry now celebrated. She watched Mayer continue to rise, moving into pop, returning to blues, dabbling in country, becoming a name that audiences screamed for. And still, she never said a word. Not until now. Not because she was bitter, because she had moved on, but because staying silent would mean pretending it didn't matter, that her years of work could be cast aside by a flash of arrogance, and that her place in the lineage of blues could be shrugged off by someone too young to understand how hard she fought to stand on that stage. And yet, the story of Mayer is not the story of one bad night. It's the story of what happens when promise turns into presumption, when admiration turns into assumption, when respect becomes a transaction instead of a foundation. She never wanted a thank you. She never wanted spotlight. She just wanted music to mean something to him the way it meant everything to her. But that's not what she saw. And so, another bridge burned quietly, not with fire but with absence. The next name on her list struck a different chord, not youthful arrogance, but seasoned condescension. A man who wore his power like a tailored suit and used it like a velvet hammer. What happens when someone you once respected tells you to smile more? Not because he wants joy, but because he wants control? That moment left a mark Bonnie never forgot, and the man behind it was Don Henley. subtle sting of condescension. Bonnie Raitt had long admired Don Henley's songwriting and command of mood. The Eagles had defined a generation of sound with harmonies that felt effortless and lyrics that blended melancholy with restraint. She respected the precision of their arrangements, the ability to fill an arena without ever raising their voices. To Bonnie, Don Henley had once represented a form of quiet power, a musician who didn't need to shout to be heard. So when their paths crossed on several benefit concerts in the late 80s, she was genuinely looking forward to collaborating with someone she believed was cut from the same cloth. She arrived prepared, open-minded, and fully invested in the spirit of artistic cooperation. What she walked into was something else entirely. The rehearsal space that had been arranged for them buzzed with techs and musicians, most of them used to deferring to whatever Henley decided. Bonnie, confident in her abilities yet always collaborative, offered a few suggestions on how to structure their set. Henley didn't even look up from his notes. He interrupted her mid-thought, shifted topics as if she hadn't spoken at all, and gestured to a technician to make changes that contradicted what she'd proposed. She tried again, gently, suggesting a key change in a transition to improve flow. This time he smirked, raised an eyebrow, and without any real humor said, "You should smile more on stage. It softens you." There was a moment of stillness in the room, the kind that never lasts more than a few seconds, but lingers long after. Bonnie didn't respond. She didn't need to. She simply turned her attention to the music. But something in her shifted that day. It wasn't the first time she had been dismissed, nor was it the worst. What made this moment stick was its subtlety. Henley hadn't shouted her down or challenged her in public. He had minimized her in small, surgical gestures, interruptions, sideways comments, and smirks that made their way into her memory like tiny shards. And perhaps most cutting of all was that he hadn't seen her as an equal. He had treated her as an accessory, a guest on a stage he believed he owned. Bonnie left that tour with no public complaints and no visible wounds, but something had been severed. She began to reevaluate all the artists she had once admired from afar. She realized how often she had extended herself only to be quietly reduced to someone who should stay in the background, soften her tone, and leave the heavy lifting to men with louder guitars and deeper voices. What haunted her about the encounter wasn't just the personal offense. It was the broader message it reinforced, that even after decades of proving herself, she could still be seen as ornamental, as someone whose best contribution was to stay pretty, sing softly, and not take up too much space. That sting wasn't just about Don Henley, it was about an entire system that had never quite known what to do with a woman who refused to play by its rules. Henley, in his polished suit and practiced detachment, embodied that system. He didn't yell, he didn't insult, he simply ignored, minimized, and smirked. And Bonnie, who had always believed in the power of showing up with integrity and honesty, realized that sometimes grace could be mistaken for weakness by those who had never fought for space in the first place. There was no dramatic falling out, no backstage blow-up, just a slow, decisive detachment. She turned down further invitations. She declined appearances that would put her back in the same room. She focused instead on the artists who didn't need to be reminded that respect isn't optional. But that memory lingered. Every time someone asked why she wasn't featured on more duets, why she didn't share more stages with the icons of her era, she thought of Henley. She thought of how easy it was for a single moment to reshape years of admiration, not because he was cruel, but because he was careless. And in that carelessness, he revealed a truth that couldn't be unseen. She didn't stop loving the music. She didn't stop loving the crowd. But she started choosing more carefully who she stood beside, not out of fear, but out of clarity. And just when she thought she had seen the last of these quiet acts of dismissal, she found herself entangled in something worse. The next name on her list wasn't subtle. He didn't hide his agenda behind charm or tradition. He was loud, defiant, unapologetic. A man who wielded music as a weapon and turned every stage into a soapbox for everything she stood against. How do you share a spotlight with someone who uses it to blind you? How do you stand still when every fiber of your being is telling you to walk away? The answer came when she crossed paths with a man named Ted Nugent. Stage that felt like a trap. There are some people whose presence overwhelms a room before they even speak. Ted Nugent was that kind of presence. Loud, unfiltered, and brimming with bravado that demanded attention, whether earned or not. Bonnie Raitt had never been drawn to that kind of energy. She didn't need fireworks to fill a stage. Her strength had always been quieter, deeper, rooted in authenticity. So when the opportunity arose in the early 1990s to participate in a charity event that claimed to be about unity and music above politics, she hesitated. But the cause mattered to her. It was supposed to be a space where ideology was set aside for the sake of something bigger. So, with hope in her heart and music on her mind, she signed on. What she stepped into was not what had been promised. From the very first sound check, Bonnie sensed the atmosphere was wrong. There was no shared mission, no collaborative energy. Instead, the venue buzzed with tension. Ted Nugent had seized control of the stage, not just musically, but rhetorically. Instead of focusing on the agreed-upon set list or the importance of the cause, he launched into unsolicited monologues about gun rights, government overreach, and what he considered real patriotism. Each statement felt more like a campaign speech than a prelude to a song. Backstage, it was no better. Bonnie kept to herself, trying to preserve her sense of purpose. But Nugent's rants echoed through the dressing rooms, through the green room, through the halls where musicians usually found camaraderie. There was no room for conversation, only declarations. And slowly, it became clear that the event had been hijacked, not in structure, but in spirit. The real breaking point came on the second night. Bonnie was standing just off stage, preparing to step into the spotlight, when she heard Nugent mid-performance railing against environmental regulations. He didn't mention her by name, but the implication was clear. He mocked musicians who care more about trees than freedom, made snide comments about soft voices and softer values, and turned what should have been a shared spotlight into a podium for his ideology. She stood frozen, her guitar in hand, and realized she was being used, not as a musician, not as an ally, but as contrast. She had become the target of a performance she had never agreed to join. The betrayal cut deeper because she had trusted the premise. She had come prepared to give her music to a cause, only to find that her presence was being twisted into a prop for someone else's message. She finished her set that night, but the soul had drained out of her performance. The applause felt hollow, the lights felt harsh, and before the next stop on the tour, she quietly withdrew. She didn't make a public statement. She didn't issue a press release. But the decision was final. She would not stand beside someone who used music as camouflage for rhetoric that hurt and divided. And when Nugent later mocked her in interviews, calling her too sensitive, calling her out for walking away, she still didn't respond. Because for Bonnie, silence can speak louder than outrage when it's rooted in integrity. That experience taught her that not all stages are created equal, that not every gig, no matter how noble its banner, deserves her presence, and that the courage to leave can sometimes be more powerful than the bravery it takes to stay. But the damage had been done, not to her reputation, so she remained respected and admired, but to her trust. She began to question every invitation, every festival bill, every seemingly harmless collaboration. She couldn't afford to be caught in someone else's shadow again. Not after that. That chapter in her life left her bruised, but also clarified. She began surrounding herself with artists who meant what they played and played what they believed. People who didn't need to shout to be heard. She leaned even harder into her values, into the belief that music should unite, not divide. That performance should be a gift, not a power grab, and that integrity on stage matters as much as it does off stage. Yet, just when she thought she had endured the worst of it, the most painful kind of erasure arrived next. One not marked by shouting or manipulation, but by cold dismissal. A fellow artist whose silence was more cutting than any insult, whose indifference made her question not just her presence, but her worth. She had idolized his voice once, played his records in the quiet corners of hotel rooms when the loneliness of the road felt too loud. But admiration turned to disillusionment when she met the man behind the mystique. And it was Van Morrison who left her with a new kind of scar. One made not from confrontation, but from invisibility. The quietest cut of all. There are times when a cold shoulder wounds more deeply than a shouting match ever could. Bonnie Raitt had endured a fair share of loud dismissals, backhanded compliments, and overt disrespect throughout her long career. But what happened with Van Morrison was something altogether different. This wasn't loud. This wasn't showy. It was quiet, subtle, almost invisible, and maybe that's why it stayed with her the longest. Bonnie had always admired Van Morrison from afar. In interviews, she spoke of his voice like it was a storm and a prayer wrapped into one. His early albums had meant something to her. In hotel rooms late at night, she'd let his songs fill the silence, not to escape, but to connect. There was something sacred about the way he navigated sorrow, something intimate in his tone that few could replicate. So when they were booked for a joint concert in London, she didn't just say yes, she said it with hope in her heart. She arrived at the venue ready, not just to perform, but to share. Collaboration was one of her greatest joys. The chance to blend voices with someone she'd long respected felt like a gift. But that hope dimmed the moment she walked into the building. Van Morrison didn't speak to her. Not a greeting, not a handshake, not even a glance. He moved through the space like she wasn't there. He spoke only through intermediaries, stagehands, assistants, anyone but her. Even at soundcheck, he remained aloof, refusing to share the stage until she had finished her part and left the area. At first, she tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was focused. Maybe he needed solitude before a show. Artists were complex, after all. She'd seen nerves manifest in strange ways, but the more time passed, the more deliberate it felt. The moments piled up. The way he walked past her without acknowledgement. The way his team acted like she was a problem to be managed, rather than a partner to be welcomed. The final insult came in a whisper, but it echoed louder than any insult ever had. A member of Morrison's staff, unaware she was in earshot, casually mentioned that Van had referred to her as fine for an opener. That's all. Not legendary, not Grammy-winning, not a peer, just fine. A warm-up act for the real show. Bonnie stood frozen, not out of shock, but out of clarity. It wasn't just that she'd been overlooked. She'd been diminished, made to feel like her decades of work meant nothing in the presence of his name. All the late nights, the tours, the battle scars, shrunk down to fine. But when the lights came up that night, Bonnie didn't flinch. She stepped onto that stage with everything she had. Every note she played, every word she sang was dipped in the fire of that moment. She didn't rage. She didn't grandstand. She simply played better than she ever had. And when she finished, the audience erupted. It was clear who had won their hearts. And as Morrison performed his set afterward, something had shifted. His music still carried weight, but the room had already chosen who they came to see. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed and the dressing rooms emptied, she sat quietly, guitar in hand, and took a breath. That breath wasn't defeat. It was release. She knew, in that moment, that she didn't need validation from him, or from anyone who refused to see her for who she was. What hurt most wasn't his coldness. It was the loss of illusion. She had wanted so badly for the man behind the music to match the poetry of his songs, and when he didn't, it broke something. Not just admiration, but trust. The kind of trust artists give each other when they walk onto the same stage. That trust was gone. But as the years passed, Bonnie didn't speak of him. She didn't tell stories, didn't whisper bitter anecdotes. She let the silence sit, because sometimes silence is the loudest truth of all. And then came the last name, the one that still makes her eyes narrow just slightly, not because of the talent, not because of rivalry, but because he represented something bigger, everything she had pushed against her entire career. Kid Rock wasn't subtle. He never had been. He was loud, brash, unapologetic, in a way that some found charming and others found exhausting. Bonnie had crossed paths with him at a summer music festival in 2005. She already knew what to expect, but nothing prepared her for the dissonance between their worlds. Before the show even started, she made a simple request: her own dressing room. Not because she was a diva, not because she wanted to be isolated, but because she knew what the backstage energy would be like. She had seen the jokes, the behavior, the posturing. She had watched how Kid Rock treated staff like background noise. She had heard the way he talked about women, like they were there to decorate, not to create. She didn't want to be part of that environment. She wanted to keep her head clear, her soul intact. But even with space, the confrontation found her. After her set, a performance she gave with every ounce of honesty and grace, she overheard a comment. Kid Rock, leaning toward a promoter, snorted and said, "Is she always that serious?" That one line carried every kind of dismissal. Her music, her presence, her purpose, reduced to a joke. She didn't respond. She didn't argue. She simply packed her guitar and left. And she never shared a bill with him again. That show marked something final in her heart. Not just about him, but about the world he represented. A world where noise was valued over nuance, where arrogance was mistaken for authenticity, and where women, no matter how accomplished, were still expected to smile, to lighten up, to know their place. Bonnie never spoke publicly about that night, until now. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because at 75, she no longer sees value in staying silent about the people who made the path harder. These 6 names are not about vendettas. They are about memory, about the bruises that don't fade, about the way disrespect lingers in the air, long after the applause fades. She's not naming names for headlines. She's naming them for herself, for every young artist who's ever felt invisible, for every woman who's ever been told she was too serious, too sensitive, too much. Because if Bonnie Raitt has taught us anything, it's that music can heal, but truth can free you. Bonnie Raitt never set out to be a symbol of resistance. She didn't enter the music world to stir controversy or call out injustice. She came to play. She came to tell the truth through her songs. But the deeper her roots dug into the soil of this industry, the more she saw what truth required. And sometimes it required names. The 6 musicians she called out didn't just hurt her pride. They shaped her resolve. Each insult, each dismissal, each moment of being overlooked didn't break her. It sharpened her. It made her guitar louder, her voice steadier, her presence more undeniable. In a world that tried to silence her, she learned how to speak through her chords and command respect with grace. This isn't just a list of who she hates. It's a reckoning, a record of scars carried with elegance, of standing her ground when it would have been easier to fade into the background. These stories weren't told for revenge. They were told to remind us that behind every strong woman in the spotlight is 100 quiet battles won in the dark. She's 75, still playing, still leading, still refusing to smile on cue. And maybe that's the most important part. Bonnie Raitt didn't just survive the music world, she mastered it. Not by playing their game, but by rewriting the rules. One heartbreak, one song, and now, one truth at a time. If this chapter of her story moved you, remember this: respect isn't given because of fame. It's earned through fire. Who else do you think quietly changed music history while battling their own behind-the-scenes war? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from legends who never needed a spotlight to shine.